Hello and welcome to another special Unsourced Wall unboxing. And a figure we'll be talking about is the Spawn Masterworks Anniversary Kickstarter Spawn figure, Classic Edition. And boy, is that a mouthful. And well, it's not really going to be an unboxing. It was originally going to be, but with how kind of lengthy the shipping schedule for this figure was to begin with, it just made more sense to do something a little bit different this time. Now that there's been like a dozen different unboxing videos made for this. So one thing I noticed about all the unboxings was that none of them really seemed to have an actual Spawn figure to compare this with. You know, because this is the remastered version of that vintage figure. Or if they did have it, it was still in the pristine mint packaging, and they weren't ever going to take it out of that. So yeah, we're going to use my little buddy here, and we're going to make this an actual full-on comparison video. Now, first off, let's talk about the remaster release for a little bit, because as you can see here, we have the figure all out. We have all the accessories, hands, weapons, swords, and other things I'll get into a little bit more detail later. But one thing that's really kind of neat is that it came in this giant slipcase. This huge box, and it's a lot really safe, thick packaging. It came like 3 layers of different boxes, like corner protectors. It was really, really thorough. And there's actually one thing that like is really cool, and let me just get that out for you right now. And that cool thing is that the slipcase actually houses this really awesome looking kind of bubble clamshell case that's styled exactly like the original's vintage packaging. And it was enough to make me tempted to just get another vintage mint Spawn, just have them displayed side by side, because I think that would be like really awesome. But like Toy Galaxy says, leave one for a next collector, and there was really no need to be greedy. But yeah, it is still like a really faithful recreation with the same sticker placements. And when the figure was in here, the same kind of pose where one side of the cape was splayed out and the other side was kind of draped over. And McFarlane even went the extra mile to not only include a comic as the actual kind of back card of the package, but he even gave it its own slipcase so that it fills in the negative space around it so that it feels like it's a full kind of background and makes it look seamless. Now let's talk about the comic, just to get it out of the way. Now there's this huge misconception I've noticed in almost all the reviews I've seen that even care to mention the comic, is that a lot of them seem to have the impression that this is a recreation of the original comic that came with the vintage toy. And that's true, but only as far as the cover goes. Like the remastered cover is Todd's touch-up of the simplistic look the original comic cover had. You know, like, let me just get this one. Just with more detail and shading and, little touch-ups in terms of things like with the masks. You can see that he kind of went in harder to give it a little bit more of finesse, of a more classic, accurate Spawn look. And this one is a little bit more toyetic. But yeah, no, it's actually really cool and really fun homage. But the back is literally just a copy and paste. The same promo images and even the same action features being listed, even though for the remastered edition, these aren't accurate at all. So it would have been fun to actually see this recreated, but with more updated and more accurate to the toy that we have at hand here. But I like the intent. I think it's actually still a pretty cool idea. Now, the real rub here is that with the vintage tie-in comic, it was literally just that, a tie-in comic. It actually wasn't even written or drawn by Tom McFarlane, and it is just like this one-off story that just summarizes and recounts, in the basest terms, Spawn's origin. And it's an entertaining read. It's really fun. It's really light, and I think it would give a kid who got this originally a good overview of what Spawn is all about, even if they didn't know anything about the comics as a whole. So that's nice. That's not what this is. That's not what the remastered edition is. The remastered edition is actually something pretty different. It's like this artist proof style director's cut edition of Spawn #1, Questions Part 1, the original first issue. And what we're getting is like the actual scans of sort of Todd's, drafting boards and stuff. And he's just giving some color commentary and some just retrospective commentary on the issue at hand. And it's actually really awesome. It gave me a lot of entertainment to read, and it was really cool and a lot of fun. And, honestly, would it have been as cool to get a tie-in style comic like the original, like just a one-off issue? Yes, but this is great also. And just to talk about it as a comic, the page stock on this is great. It's thin, but doesn't feel flimsy or fragile. It feels like good photo stock, you know, like you would get a Kinko's or something, or a Polaroid. You also get some little back matter too. So it's a really fun issue, and I thought it was a great addition, even if they're not the same. So it's not something that you can just swap one over the other. But it's great, and I do think that the covers look really awesome and actually really representative of their respective toys. Like this actually kind of looks like a toy, just a little bit. Now let's get to the meat of this video. One of the funniest things that this release came with was this really self-indulgent checklist of all the things the remastered version can do that the vintage couldn't. And honestly, it's very biased. Like he even brings in like the scale at Heintic question, and I mean why. So I thought it'd be fun for this video to just go down the checklist when I have time. But first off, some general observations. I think this is a really cool looking figure, and I know that there's been a lot of controversy on whether or not the pre-sculpted twisted torso was a good idea. I think a lot of people didn't want that; they wanted to pose it on its own, and this does make some poses awkward, but I would say the level of detail and just a general sort of like intricacy it gets into that you can hardly notice this when you get into some really cool poses. Um, in any case, like no matter like kind of how like minimally you just kind of move the figure around because of this twisted nature of the chest and everything, and how you can see all the sinews and just how sort of already all over the place the sculpt is, and it's kind of how the detail work is. It kind of helps aid the fact that even if you just kind of move it just slightly, it looks like the figure is always in motion. It just gives it this permanent like sense of flowing dynamism. And yeah, is it kind of lame? Yes, it gives off that old school like mid to late 90s McFarlane statue figure kind of thing. And that's never been my favorite. But it doesn't look as bad as that can be. And I think it's really awesome. And just before we get into it, I do think that it's a really kind of accurate looking rendition of the vintage figure. Now I know that's just the classic Spawn design, red chest, white borders, overall black costume, the flowing red cape. Like these are just standard Spawn things. But there's even a few, kind of add-ons that I thought was really awesome and that were faithful and even when they didn't need to be. Like you have the open palm grasping hand, and on the retro remaster edition, it's the same kind, even like the same kind of finger placements and just the same kind of hooked look. And you also have just the number of spikes, all that kind of stuff. I think it's actually like a really cool remake and update of that without going overboard. So I think it kind of does capture the look of this in a really tangible way. I think that's pretty awesome. Anyway, let's move on to this checklist. Now, first off, we have head. Now, in the original, side to side, that works okay. Up and down, other than just what the body moves and how the plate moves, you can get kind of the illusion of up and down, but mostly side to side. In this one, the head is really awkward because not only do you have a place where it connects to the chest, and the neck is its own kind of piece, and then the head is on its own little joint there, or swivel. It's really, really finicky. And the best way it ever looks is when you have it flush to the chest where the collarbone actually meets the rest of the clavicle there. And it's really hard to not move that and to only move the head, because if you move that point of connection with the chest, you just get this huge gap. Now you're always going to get a gap because I don't know why this thing doesn't actually sit flush, but it's the least egregious it looks. But yeah, no, head moves side to side. You can get some slight down and not even up. You can't even look up. You only look really, really straightforward. Even when you get to that side angle, you can see that it doesn't look up at all. And you could feasibly remove the entire head, make it look up, and then try to place it down, but the rest of the collar is just going to snap it back into place. So no up. Next up, we have biceps. No bicep swivel. In this, yes, you do have a bicep swivel on both arms, and they actually come in handy because the shoulder kind of pauldrons in the cave here, they don't let you go anywhere up at all. But if you move and flatten out the biceps, you can get just like a half a centimeter more coverage there, and that's fine. Well, it's not fine, but it's something. and then the rest on the other side. So you have bicep swivel there, but it doesn't come in handy at all unless you just want that tiny speck of some more horizontal nature there. Next up is shoulder. So here we go. Yeah, shoulders go up and down. That's about it. And smooth enough for a vintage figure. And these, yeah, you can't do anything with the shoulders that go all the way back, which I guess will help when you want to get some really cool kind of charging poses with like the gun or the sword. But up, you get no clearance at all. Let me see that. Same on the other side. Now the shoulders do drop down and drop up a little bit, so you can get like a tiny little bit more coverage there, but it's not really going to make any difference. Next up is elbows and pre-molded elbows. You get like you're already at like a small little angle, but that's about as good as it gets. And these ones you get a single jointed elbow, and it's pretty decent, but it is really limited. I don't mind that because it's meant to be kind of a new version of this sort of vintage figure, but you know, if you want something that's going to be like kind of a new modern style figure, single jointed and it's very has no kind of coverage there, doesn't even go straight 90 degrees, it's pretty lame. I think maybe you could get the bicep like more down, more flat, and you get like a tiny speck more coverage. Still doesn't get you 90 degrees though. Next up is wrists and pre-molded wrists. You really can't do anything with those. They are at kind of like an open angle. This one is actually curving inward toward the body, which is, I guess, is a more dynamic pose than just flat open wrists. These ones, side to side, you can swirl them around, up and down, just get them in any kind of place you want. It's really fun. These are good wrists. Yeah, no complaints there. Finally, no complaints there. Next up is waist, and this has no waist. It's completely part of the torso, goes straight down like this groin area. I guess hip, but hips go straight up and down. It's really nothing at all. And here, it does have a waist, and you can kind of like pivot like side to side and everything, but not really anything you can do because the weight of the cape itself really keeps you from actually getting anywhere with it. Like if you try to like angle it forward and get the cape behind you a little bit up, it'll just slide back down. I've tried. It doesn't really work, but it's nice, and you get like a stand or something, you'll get some more dynamism out of that. Next up is thigh, and no, there's no thigh articulation here. You just have kind of the general kind of leg going side to side, I mean forward and back, but the rest of the thigh is one singular piece. And here you get that kind of connection at the waist, you know, front and back and everything, and side to side, but also here's a little better demonstration of that. You can pivot the thigh, the upper thigh here. And what's weird is that you think you could do that with this leg because it's still just one molded, sculpted piece, but actually you can't do that to the upper thigh, but you can do it to the lower thigh. I don't know why that's the case here, where you still have the thigh articulation, but it's only reserved for like this small sliver of the lower thigh, because there's nothing that really means that this has to be like one static piece, the upper thigh to the pouches, but that's just the way it is. But it does offer a little bit more. You get more of a kind of spread going on. That's about it. Next up is ankles. Yeah, this is one static piece straight down from the shins all the way down to the soles. So nothing you can do there. Here you have, you know, decent side to side, back and front ankles. Yeah, they're fine. Again, there's not much you can really do because you really want to get it kind of static to the ground anyway, or else the figure is going to topple over. I mean, it does come with this nice stand, but this is a really thin piece of plastic, so it doesn't really add much. But again, if you have a stand, like a proper kind of figure display stand, you can get some things going here, especially if you want to do like a little charging kick or kind of celestial kind of floating where the foot points downwards. You can do it. You really can. Next up is toes. Like I said, static foot. Here, get this toe bend, go straight up. It doesn't really offer much. I don't know what you would need with toes anyway. It's not like it offers any kind of grip or leverage. So, toes. So next up we have our knees. Yeah, they go straight up and down. Now the knees are actually kind of weird on this one because they're very very important to gain is the balance. Now, I know there's a lot of reviews saying that you have to balance it on its cape, which is the case here because I'm filming this on like a really soft surface. But if you get on a nice, even, kind of hard table kind of surface, the knees are really important because then you can angle one and it'll balance out really nicely. And you don't have to drag the cape along with this. But it's a very center knee, goes 90 degrees back. That's about it. These ones are a double jointed knee. Now, it's really hard to get both double joints to kind of work at a time. It's really kind of awkward, especially when you have to like handle around like the spikes and everything. But they're soft. I mean, like in terms of flimsy, but they're soft and rigid. You're not feeling like you're gonna kind of scrape the plastic or anything, and they're nice. Yeah, see right here, this one, the top joint on the double jointed knees is more pliable, and then it's harder to get the bottom joint here going. There we go. So yeah, good double jointed knees. Now the next section on this checklist concerns the weapons, and on the checklist it says that a lot of these are dependent on the tier you pledge to the Kickstarter. Now this standard classic style remaster only comes with the assault rifle, the sword, the gun style necroplasm, and the necro knife. Which, neat. I like these a lot. But what was really annoying was that the only actual weapon the vintage figure came with, which was this kind of wooden plank with the nail through it, was only available in its remastered form through an exclusive tier that was like twice as much. And that's just kind of scummy. But I was able to track one down, and now let's get through all of them. Now, first off, the sword is awesome. You remove the pommel and you kind of slip it through the peg hands. They're like kind of the exchangeable hands. Now, despite the real lack of range because of the shoulders and biceps not being able to add much to it and not being able to have some really cool poses that way, the sheer size of it makes it still look pretty menacing and dynamic without having to actually move it around much. And I think that's really awesome. And before you ask, yes, you can double-hand it too. So let me just get that set up. Now for a double-handed one, you can only really get in this position because this is about as far as the tolerances on the chest and the biceps go. I'm actually really scared of keeping in this for long because it feels like you're stretching out the elbows and everything, like maybe beyond this breaking point. But it actually double hands the sword really, really well. The hilt is long enough, and the pommel seems to keep everything in place securely. But I'm a little bit iffy on keeping in this for long. The same goes for the assault rifle, at least in terms of like its sheer size and ridiculousness. It's like a pure 90s comic weapon. It's ridiculous and it's insane. And no matter how you angle it, it still gives off that kind of really dynamic, imposing look without having to do much. What I really want to talk about though is that it doesn't fit any way well in the actual trigger finger hand. The hilt is just a little bit too loose in there, and it's really bad. The only real way you can actually get it to sit comfortably is if you sort of angle kind of the stock against the hand itself and just kind of wedge it in there, because otherwise it's going to come really, really loose. Now, technically, you can double hand the assault rifle too, but the second trigger hand doesn't come anywhere close to actually going over and completing the second trigger. So this is about as good as you can get it. You can use the second grasping hand to kind of curl over the barrel here, wherever this is, but it doesn't really do a good job of that either. So the assault rifle, really great, really fun, but it's an iffy weapon at best. Now the necroplasm is a similarly iffy accessory because it doesn't fit well into either the grasping hands or the peg hole hand used for the sword. And the best thing I can figure is that it works the best with the trigger hand. Because like the sword, you can kind of curl and leverage one of the necroplasm tendrils around the hand a bit. Just give it some more kind of grip there, some more stability. And it works fine enough and looks pretty cool. So other than that, it's fine. Now, one of the coolest things I heard about this figure and this accessory in general is that it's actually compatible with other kind of like 6-inch style spawns, more recent releases. And I thought it'd be pretty cool if maybe by some chance that was also true for like the kind of original vintage figure. And and kinda, but not really. Like the smallest tendril sort of works, but is not stable at all. And that would be really cool, but I understand why it doesn't. Now, last for the standard accessories you get is the Necro knife, which is basically made for the peg hole sword hand. The handle just kind of fits snugly in there, and it's fine. It's a little bit of a basic look. It doesn't really look that impressive. Like the other necroplasm weapon is like this insane tendrily energy force thing, and this is just like a small dagger. That's good if you want something like that. It's fine. Now, before we move on to the last weapon, the exclusive wooden plank with nails, I just want to say that with this configuration of hands on, the peg hole sword hand and the open palm grasping hand, you've basically gotten a fairly accurate rendition of what the original sort of configuration of hands were for the vintage. You know, peg hole, open palm grasping. And so you would think that the wooden plank with nails would kind of fit there, but it doesn't. It doesn't have the clearance. The handle doesn't work. You can't move the handle or the pommel or whatever to sort of make it fit snugly in there like you can with the sword. This is actually made for the trigger hand. So let me just get that all set up. Now, when you get the wooden plank with swords all the way up to the hilt in the trigger hand, you can see how nicely it sort of sits flush against that with the thumbs and the fingers kind of curling over, like kind of exactly. And, you know, that's nice. It's fine. And besides, either way, this new one just doesn't look complete, you know, as a remake of the vintage figure without it. Like the club is this corny, silly, goofy looking chunk of a weapon and doesn't really look menacing or that sort of impressive at all compared to like the either the assault rifle or the sword or necroplasm. But then again, like the vintage figure, it came with and also just this silly, corny weapon. And I feel like if you're gonna sort of try and redo it, then you need that. And I think it's a great look, and I'm glad to have tracked this down because without it, it just doesn't work as right. And best thing of all, because you have kind of the articulated wrists, you can just curl over the hand a little bit, like the original figure does. It's kind of like that 9-degree angle, and okay, looking perfect. Now, there's two things the checklist doesn't really mention that I thought would be fun to point out. The first being is that the cape for the remaster isn't removable. Like, yes, you have a peg in the back and pegs in the front, but it's all super glued in. So it's technically not meant to come off at all. I heard rumors of someone actually, you know, getting it off and replacing it with like a felt cape, but it's not meant to, and it's more trouble than it's worth because, you know, you're just gonna get some garish looking pegs and holes everywhere, and it's just not worth it for how expensive the figure was and just the risk of damaging it permanently. The vintage, as you've probably seen throughout the video, comes up fine. You're left with this really garish connector piece in the back. You can hardly see it front to front. And this is hard to take off anyway, so it's kind of left there. Get a little handle. So I think that's worth it. One thing I want to note is that the vintage cape also comes like this collar connector that's meant to keep everything in place, but it does nothing. It really does nothing at all. I don't know why this couldn't just been part of the mold or the sculpt. It probably would have made looking for vintage versions of this less hard because this is always the piece that's most missing. I can understand why, because it always just kind of flips back and out. It's kind of worthless. Before I move on from the cape, I just forgot that. So both of these purport to have like adjustable hinged sort of cape motions, so you can kind of claw everything in, kind of pose the cape around. Now that didn't really work with the vintage figure because this is a plastic hinge, and just by sitting in the box, these just permanently warped to where they are now. Like this is what it looked like in the original box. One draped over, one splayed out, and you can't really get to look anywhere else unless you kind of keep it like molded in a kind of position and then let time warp it to that. And that's more trouble than it's worth. Now these come with steel hinges, and they kind of had the same thing happen to them. Like one was splayed out, but it's also a lot tighter that way, and you can actually get some sort of posability, but it comes way too down, so that if you try to get him like on a table, this will just keep popping up because the clearance from the table to the rest of it just isn't there. Now this side came draped over, similar to the vintage, but because of that, every time you try to open it, it's a lot more loose. Now I've tried to kind of do some pledge floor finish right there to tighten it up, and it's worked slightly, but it's still a lot more loose out of the box than the first one was. So it kind of had the same problem. But you can still, kind of get a lot more motion out of that than you could from this one. But there is one drawback to these. Much like I said, this one is really irregular and doesn't really work when you kind of drape it forward. When you drape both forward, it just doesn't look cool. It looks just like really awkward, like a gaggle of jagged edges that have no kind of cohesiveness to it. And I get it, that's like a McFarlane staple, but it just looks awkward and kind of dumb. But with the vintage figure, let me get this over here. When you kind of drape both pieces over, it's like this uniform, like actual kind of Dracula vampire gothic style cape clothes. It actually looks really cool. Like, that's one thing that this has over that, for sure. Right, on to the second thing the checklist doesn't really mention is that second action feature that both of the backs of the comics list, which is that the steel chains around the hips are removable, at least only on the vintage figure. Now you would remove the steel chains from connectors on the front and on the back, and then you put him in his either open claw or peg hole hand, and he'd be flailing around the chains. You can't really do that with the remastered version because it's all kind of taped in. Now you could get some pliers and sort of separate the connecting piece of this thing on both ends, and then maybe jerry rig a way to put it back together, make it reassembly friendly. But that's way more trouble than it's worth. And honestly, it feels like a step backwards because I think there was a way to actually get that working and not have to do that much work to do it. But yeah, let me show you that right now. So yeah, here we go. It's really not the best effect because it's still warped to like how it's supposed to look around the hips. But it's something. It's an extra little weapon if you wanted to. I will say though that it's harder to get it off on this one. That's why I left this one alone than this one. Like this one, like it's really, really tough to get this back into place. This one just kind of goes in really seamlessly. Yeah, it's not really that great weapon, but it's something more. And it's really weird that this kind of deluxe remake of it couldn't think of a way to do that either. And yeah, I think that's it for going through the checklist. It does leave a few things out from the vintage that are unique to it, so it's kind of biased, like I said. But yeah, that's about it. And listen, I know I've been kind of hard on it, but I do love this figure, honestly. I've never been much of a Spawn fan, but kind of having these two versions of the figure side by side is kind of experience, and it just feels like a perfect time capsule to that specific era of comic history. And I'm kind of awestruck by it. Yeah, like, is it perfect? Was it worth all like the hassle? No, but it's honestly better than I expected it would be. Like, it has a lot of range of motion, and despite the fact that the cape gets in the way and that this pre-posed torso makes look kind of awkward here and there, it's so much more of an actual action figure than, say, McFarlane's other stuff for Spawn, especially in the mid to late 90s, where it's like a statue and you can move like one wrist there or one ankle there, and it's an action figure, which is bullshit. This is a lot more fun to pose around and make it look cool, and especially if you're actually playing with it. I think this is a thing you can actually play with. Like, if you're not one of those collectors that just wants to keep it in like the box or on a shelf or in a display case, this is something that you can actually kind of have fun messing around with and just sort of having fun with, especially next to these two. It's fun. It's a fun figure, despite all the kind of drawbacks. Apparently, Spawn wants to keep the Spawn Masterworks line going, and he's confirmed that the next figure is going to be Medieval Spawn, so another figure from the vintage line. I hope he does Violator soon. It would be great to have Spawn and his actual villain side by side. Who knows? I might get the vintage Violator and do a video on that just to contend him with my vintage Spawn, but fingers crossed. Anyway, I'm going to be adding in some gallery shots of this, with all the different hand configurations and the ways you can handle the weapons. Let me get that out there. And yeah, thank you for watching. Stay tuned for that, and have a great one. See you again next time. So one thing I want to mention is that this actually comes with alternate head, but it's so pointless and so worthless. Like, it's not movable. It's not articulated in any way. It's a static piece. I'm not even going to put it on the figure. It means nothing. There's actually 4 collectible alternate heads that came throughout all three tiers: Screaming Spawn, Zipperface Spawn, Mask Spawn, and Al Simmons. And only Al Simmons and the Mask Spawn are articulated. Yeah, kind of scummy. But next up, stay tuned for the gallery shots. So thank you again for watching.